Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's very nice to be back with you. Sorry it's quite so distant and remote. I hope you've all been working hard on everything that's ongoing for schools, because I knew you'd obviously all be missing my dulcet tones. I decided it was time for us to work through a PowerPoint together. Okay, so looking here, you can see we are back to the delight that is an Inspector Calls. We're focusing on the character of Inspector Gould. I want you to open your books, your classwork books, because you all took them home as instructed. I want you to put the title, an Inspector Calls, and then Inspector Gould. I want you to underline that with a ruler. And then I want you to look at this question. Which of the Inspector Gould's characteristics help to make him an effective inspector? I'm going to pause the recording so that you have a minute and a half to write down all of the reasons you think Inspector Gould is an effective inspector. I want you to write them in your books. I'm going to give you 90 seconds starting now. Okay guys, that's roughly 90 seconds. We're going to move on to the next task. I hope you've all got at least 3 to 4 different reasons written down. Here are some of mine. So add these to the list you made if you made it in a bullet point list, or add these to the little mind map if you created it through that way. So we've got Inspector Gould's appearance makes him a daunting prospect for those that he interrogates. He's described as, and when you're noting this down, don't forget to use the quotation marks. You must keep practicing that. An impression of massiveness, solidity, and purposefulness. He's a man in his 50s, dressed in a plain, darkish suit. Okay. The phrase here that's really interesting is it says an impression of massiveness, which implies to us that he isn't actually big. It's the way he carries himself. It's that sense of authority that he gets across to both the audience and the Berling family. The next reason he's so effective, his manner of speaking. He's also makes him an effective inspector. Look at how it's described. He speaks carefully, weightily, and has a disconcerting habit of looking hard at the person he addresses before actually speaking. Again, if we're zooming in here on the quote, we focus in on that looking hard. Okay, that's very precise. He doesn't use the word staring when he's writing this, which is very much questioning and aggressive. Looking hard is different to that. It implies a focus, it implies a force, but also to me, it's almost as though he's looking through them. Think about any of the quotes that we've heard about, especially from Sheila and Eric, in reference to the inspector. See if there's anything that gives that impression that they get a sense that he's almost seeing through them, he's seeing the real them. And anything that he says to any of the Berlings that could support that interpretation. Next, he has authority. He deals with the members of the family firmly and takes charge whenever they go off topic. Again, what will really help this list and what will make it more useful, see, you've got your book, see, can you find any quotes that you could link to this point that supports it? Where does he bring everybody back? Where does he stop people losing their focus? Where does he show that he's the one that's deciding how this is being done? And then lastly in my list, he is systematic. He goes through each member of the family one by one. He manages to make each family member confess to what they have done. That's most pertinent with Mrs. Berling, really, because she's the one that he has to work the hardest on. Look at how she says she isn't going to answer his questions and how actually in the end he wins. Why does he win? He doesn't threaten her with arresting her. She knows she's done nothing illegal, but yet she does give in and end up answering his questions and telling him what she did. If you need more time to get these noted down, please pause the recording now and keep taking notes. Now, the downfall of Eva Smith. Inspector Gould has now heard the testimony of each of the family members, because obviously we read through in class before we finished, or kind of hot closed, as it were, all of Act 3. So we've read all of this together, so we remember what everybody's confessed, okay? So Inspector Gould has now heard the testimony of each of the family members and has built up a picture of Eva Smith / Daisy Renton's final few years. Using the template on this slide, that's to the left, it's in the kind of bluey green background colour. Complete Inspector Gould's notes on the case. So I want you to draw this out in the same way it is on this sheet. I want a pencil and a ruler for the table. I want the title of the table to be the case of Eva Smith. And then you're going to break it down by the name of each character on the left. And we're keeping it to the same order as in the play. Okay, so your first task is I want you to note down, obviously this is very easy, the first one, so you do not need to look at your books, okay? I want you to note down what is it each of these characters confess to. What is it they have done? What is their part in Eva Smith's downfall? Once you've done that, I want you to try and add 1 or 2. Any of my green and purples, you need to have 2. Reds and yellows, 1 for definite. If you can, put 2 down. That will be fantastic. Quotes for each character that supports what you said about their confession. Now, if we really want to test ourselves and challenge ourselves, you're going to do that from memory. You're going to note down the quotes that you have learned and you can remember in relation to each of these characters' confessions. If you can't, then you need to go back through your text and have a look. If you don't have your own text, go onto the student shared area and there is a printable version, or you could just open it in Word. It might be Word or it might be on a PDF, I can't remember now, version of the text. So even if you don't have your own one, you've still got access to it. If you can't find it on the student shared, email me and I will send you that copy. So first of all, note down just what each character confesses, and then I want 1 or 2 quotes that support what you said their confession is, ideally from memory. If you can't, get it from the text. Now remember, Mr. Burling and Sheila confess in Act 1. Gerald and Mrs. Burling confess in Act 2. Eric in Act 3. Okay, just to help you and guide you when you're looking for those quotes. Now you're going to need to pause the recording here, because if you're doing this in detail, this task should take you at least 10 minutes. If you're going to be looking through the text for quotes, it will probably take you 20 or 25, because looking for those quotes will slow you down a little bit. Remember, when finding a quote, it has to link to what you've said their part in the downfall is. Okay? Your quote has to clearly connect to the statement you've made. Okay, I'm assuming everybody has now come off of pause and you are ready for your next task. Now we are going to, I know we already read together as a class the end of Act 3, but I'm going to reread that with you all now, and I'm going to stop at some points so that you can make some annotations the same as we do in class. You can either highlight, if you've got highlighters at home, fantastic. If you don't, just get your ruler and underline it with a pencil or underline it with a pen, okay? You might, if you've got sticky notes that we use in class, fabulous. You can put your annotations on those. if you don't, try and make your annotations at the side of the page. If you can't do that, write down the page number, the first word in the quote, then do the 3 dots, the ellipsis, and then do the last word in the quote, and then write the annotation, all of that, so you're writing in your classwork book, and then put the annotation next to it. Don't worry, we won't be doing as many annotations as we would in class, because obviously this doesn't facilitate that quite as well, but we will still be making some because I want to make sure that end of Act 3 is still annotated, ready for next year, okay? Once we've read that and annotated it, you're going to need to pause the recording again and complete the task that's in the green and the red at the bottom of this slide. Again, as already said, if you don't have your own copy of Winning Spectacles, get it from the SharePoint. If you can't find it on there, email me and I will send you a copy. So, we are going to begin reading from page 207. If you're in the version that most of us have, that's the one with the 3 different plays in it. So that's page 207, Act 3, and we're going to start from straight after the inspector has left. So you'll see the speech that the inspector makes about the one Eva Smith has gone, but there are millions and millions. Then you have almost like a mini paragraph of stage directions. We're going to start from the first thing Mr. Burling says after that. I'm going to assume you've all found that page now. Okay, so Mr. Burling, angrily to Eric, "You're the one I blame for this." Eric, "I'll bet I am." Burling, angry, "Yes, and you don't realise yet all you've done. Most of this is bound to come out. There'll be a public scandal." Now think about it. Why is Mr. Burling so bothered about a public scandal? He referenced right in Act 1 when he was talking to Gerald, didn't he? That he's in line for the knighthood as long as none of them get into trouble. So that's our first annotation. The fact that he's angry about the public scandal links to his fear about losing the knighthood, and that's the only focus he has. His only concern is the impact on him. Eric, "Well, I don't care now." Burling, You don't seem to care about anything, but I care. I was almost certain for a knighthood in the next honours list. There, he explicitly says it, doesn't it? It reinforces to the audience the fact that Mr. Burling hasn't changed. He hasn't started caring about anything differently from the opening of the play, really emphasising that theme of the old versus young, because we're seeing how that contrasts to Eric. Eric laughs rather hysterically, pointing at him. "Oh, for God's sakes, what does it matter now whether they give you a knighthood or not?" Burling, storming, "Doesn't matter to you. Apparently nothing matters to you, but it may interest you to know that until every penny of that money you stole is repaid, you'll work for nothing. And there's going to be no more of this drinking round the town and picking up women in the palace bar." Mrs. Burling coming to life. "I should think not. Eric, I'm absolutely ashamed of you." "Well, I don't blame you, but don't forget, I'm ashamed of you as well. Yes, both of you." Again, showing Eric's difference. Why would Eric be ashamed of them? Neither of them have broken the law, but they've both done things that are morally questionable. So that's showing us that Eric has understood the repercussions of their actions to Eva Smith, and he has learned. So we've got a link there to the theme of old versus young. He's learned, they haven't learned, but also a link to the theme of cause and effect. Eric's realised that their actions caused Eva's suicide. Burling, angrily, "Drop that. There's every excuse for what your mother and I did. It turned out unfortunately. That's all." Again, not taking any responsibility, only seeing it as bad luck. He's still not acknowledging that they did anything morally wrong. Sheila, scornfully, "That's all? Well, what have you to say? I don't know where to begin." "Then don't begin. Nobody wants you to." "I've behaved badly too. I know I did. I'm ashamed of it. But now you're beginning all over again to pretend that nothing much has happened. Nothing much has happened. Haven't I already said there'll be a public scandal, unless we're lucky? And who here will suffer from that more than I will? But that's not what I'm talking about. I don't care about that. The point is, you don't seem to have learned anything. And that's the point Priestley's making. The inspector is there to teach them, to guide them. And you can only improve if you're willing to learn. And that's what he's showing about that younger generation. He's talking to the younger generation in the audience. You're the ones that can change. You're the ones that can keep pushing for social equality and social change. Remember, he was starting a political party. Remember, he was pushing for that socialist political ideal. Remember, he was pushing for that NHS. Don't I? Well, you're quite wrong there. I've learned plenty tonight, and you don't want me to tell you what I learned. I hope when I look back on tonight, when I think of what I was feeling when the five of us sat down to dinner at the table. Eric cutting in. Yes, and you do remember what you said to Gerald and me after dinner when you were feeling so pleased with yourself. You told us that a man has to make his own way, look after himself and mind his own business, and that we weren't to take any notice of these cranks who tell us that everybody has to look after everybody else, as if we were all mixed up together. Do you remember? Yes. And then one of those cranks walked in. The inspector laughs bitterly. I didn't notice you told him that it's every man for himself. Here, we've got two things going on. The dramatic device Priestley is using is he's getting Eric to repeat Berling's words back at him, which is really powerful. But also the fact that he's highlighting that Mr. Berling said that only moments before the inspector turned up. He's also linking to that sense towards the end of the play that we get of questioning who, what is the inspector, why is he there? It adds to that mystery of him and that sense of, is he a message from the heavens to tell the Berlings? Is he the embodiment of the Berlings' conscious? Is he the ghost of Eva's father? What is he? Remember, Priestley very specifically leaves that open for our interpretation. Is he a representation of Priestley himself on the grounds that Priestley would have been classed in that group of cranks that Mr. Berling is referring to? Sheila, sharply attentive. Is that when the inspector came? Just after father had said that? Eric, yes. What of it? Mrs. Berling. Now what's the matter, Sheila? Sheila, slowly. It's queer, very queer. She looks at them reflectively. Mrs. Berling, with some excitement. I know what you're going to say, because I've been wondering myself. Doesn't much matter now, of course. But was he really a police inspector? Again, interesting. She was one of the first people to start really questioning that after he's left. She's been the most insightful all the way through. She was the quickest to learn. She's understood the power and the potency of the inspector. And now again, she's beginning to unravel it. But what's most important is what she comes to say in a little while, where she realises it doesn't matter if he was or wasn't. Berling. Well, if he wasn't, it matters a devil of a lot. Makes all the difference. No, it doesn't. Don't talk rubbish. Of course it does. Well, it doesn't to me, and it oughtn't to you either. Mrs. Berling. Don't be childish, Sheila. Again, when both the Berlings are saying it matters whether he's an inspector or not, and Sheila's saying it isn't, that's linking to that old versus young, the fact that the younger learn and change and the older don't. I'm not being. If you want to know, it's you two who are being childish. Try not to face the facts. I won't have that sort of talk. Any more of that and you'll leave this room. That'll be terrible for her, won't it? I'm going anyhow in a minute or two. But don't you see? If all that's come out tonight is true, then it doesn't much matter who it was who made us confess. And it was true, wasn't it? You turned the girl out of one job, and I had her turned out of another. Gerald kept her at a time when he was supposed to be too busy to see me. Eric, well, we know what Eric did. And Mother hardened her heart and gave her the final push that finished her. That's what's important, and not whether a man is a police inspector or not. He was our police inspector, all right. There we go, linking Eric and Sheila together. They're both seeing the importance, the potency of what they've learned, and they're both realising that whether he's criminal investigator or not, he's shone a light on their wrongdoings. He's inspected their failings. Sheila, that's what I mean, Eric. But if it's any comfort to you, sorry, I can't get the page. And it isn't to me. I have an idea, and I had it all along vaguely, that there was something curious about him. He never seemed like an ordinary police inspector. Rather excited. You're right, I felt it too, to Mrs. Burling, didn't you? Well, I must say his manner was quite extraordinary. So rude and assertive. Then look at the way he talked to me, telling me to shut up and so on. He must have known I was an ex-Lord Mayor and a magistrate and so forth. Besides, the way he talked, you remember? I mean, they don't talk like that. I've had dealings with a dozen of them. Again, he's grouping them all together, isn't he? Again, we've got Priestley showing Burling saying they, much like Mrs. Burling to girls of that class. They're grouping people. They don't see them as individuals. They are defined by their position and what they do. Sheila, all right, but it doesn't make any real difference, you know? Of course it does. No, Sheila's right. It doesn't. Angrily, that's correct. That is, coming from you, you're the one it makes the most difference to. You've confessed to theft, and now he knows all about it, and he can bring it out. And in the inquest, he can bring it out at the inquest, and then if necessary, carry it to court. He can't do anything to your mother and Sheila and me, except perhaps make us look a bit ashamed of ourselves in public. But as for you, he can ruin you, you know. Slowly, we hardly ever told him anything he didn't know. Did you notice that? That's nothing. He had a bit of information left by the girl and made a few smart guesses. But the fact remains that if we hadn't talked so much, he'd have had little to go on. Looks angry at them. And really, when I come to think of it, why you all had to go letting everything come out like that beats me. It's all right talking like that now, but he made us confess. Here, key quote, highlight. But he made us confess, okay? That's reinforcing the power, the control he had. And if you look back, he didn't exert power by being aggressive. He didn't threaten anybody with getting arrested. He just calmly took control of the situation and wouldn't let them get away with lying. He hinted at what he knew, and that's all he had to do. The slightest hint, and they crumbled. But that's a key quote, stories are muscular. But he made us confess. He certainly didn't make me confess. As you call it, I told him quite plainly that I thought I had done no more than my duty. Again, that's a key quote to highlight Mrs. Burling, reinforcing to such a degree how little she's learned and the fact that she really doesn't see anything wrong with what she did. Oh, Mother, that is, you allowed yourselves to be bluffed. Yes, bluffed. Protesting. Now really, no, not you, my dear, but these two. That fellow obviously didn't like us. He was prejudiced from the start. Interesting here, he views the inspector as prejudice rather than their behaviour as prejudice. Probably a socialist or some sort of crank. Again, still using that language, still calling people who are socialist cranks. He talked like one, and then, instead of standing up to him, you let him bluff you into talking about your private affairs. You ought to have stood up to him. Eric, sulkily, well, I didn't notice you standing up to him. No, because by that time you'd admitted You'd been taking money. What chance had I after that? Now, did he really stand up to it at any other point? He tried to intimidate him by referencing how close he is to his boss. That didn't work. He tried to say no to things, but allowed himself to be overpowered by the inspector. He attempted to stand up on a few occasions, but they were very weak attempts, and he always backed down. That wouldn't have worked. Sorry, I lost where I was. That wouldn't have worked, Sheila. Of course it wouldn't, Mrs. Burling. Really. From the way you children talk, you might be wanting to help him instead of us. Now, just be quiet so that your father can decide what we ought to do. Looks inspectingly at Burling. She's being a very typical woman for a 1920s. Okay, she's looking to her husband. He's the one that has to make the decision. He's the one that has to fix this. Yes, well, we'll have to do something and get to work quickly too. As he hesitates, there is a ring at the front door. They look at each other in alarm. Now, who's this? Had I better go? No, Edna will go. I'll ask her to wait up and make us some tea. It might be Gerald coming back. Yes, of course. I'd forgotten about him. Edna appears. It's Mr. Croft. Gerald appears and Edna withdraws. I hope you don't mind my coming back. No, of course not, Gerald. I had a special reason for coming. When did that inspector go? Only a few minutes ago. He's put us all through it. Mrs. Burling, warningly. Sheila, Gerald might as well know. Hastily. Now, we needn't bother him with all that stuff. Now, why does Mr. Burling desperately not want Gerald to know? Gerald's already marrying below his class with Sheila. He doesn't want to risk putting Gerald off by knowing any scandal that might be attached to the family, if he can cover it up. All right, to Gerald, but we're all in it, up to our neck. It got worse after you left. How did he behave? He was frightening. If you ask me, he behaved in a very peculiar and suspicious manner. The rude way he spoke to Mr. Burling and me, it was quite extraordinary. They all look inquiringly at Gerald, excitedly. You know something. What is it? That man wasn't a police officer. What? Are you certain? I'm almost certain. That's what I came back to tell you, excitedly. Good lad. You asked about him, eh? Yes. I met a police sergeant I know down the road. I asked him about this Inspector Gould and described the chap carefully to him. He swore that there wasn't any Inspector Gould or anybody like him on the force here. You didn't tell him? No. I passed it off by saying I'd been having an argument with somebody. But the point is, this sergeant was dead certain they hadn't any inspector at all like the chap who came here. By jingo, a fake! Mrs. Burling triumphantly. Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say I couldn't imagine a real police inspector talking like that to us? Well, you were right. There isn't any such inspector. We've been had. Beginning to move. I'm going to make certain of this. What are you going to do? Ring up the Chief Constable, Colonel Roberts. Careful what you say, dear. Now at the telephone, of course. Bromley, 8752. The others wait. I was going to do this anyhow. I've had my suspicions all along. Did he really? That's what we need to question ourselves. At telephone. Colonel Roberts, please. Arthur Burling here. Oh, Roberts. Burling here. Sorry to ring you up so late, but can you tell me if an Inspector Gould has joined your staff lately? Gould. Goole. A new man. Tall. Clean-shaven. Here he can describe the appearance of the actor playing the inspector. I see. Yes. Well, that settles it. No, just a little argument we were having here. Good night. He puts down the telephone and looks at the others. There's no Inspector Gould on the police. That man definitely wasn't a police inspector at all. As Gerald says, we've been had. I felt it all the time. He never talked like one. He never even looked like one. This makes a difference, you know. In fact, it makes all the difference. Of course, bitterly. I suppose we're all nice people now. If you've nothing more sensible than that to say, Sheila, you'd better keep quiet. She's right, though, angrily, and you'd better keep quiet anyhow if that had been a police inspector and he'd heard you confess. Warningly, Arthur, careful. Hastily, yes. You see, Gerald, you haven't to know the rest of our crimes and idiocies. That's all right. I don't want to Berlin. What do you make of this business now? Was it a hoax? Of course. Somebody put the fellow up to coming here and hoaxing us. There are people in this town who dislike me enough to do that. We ought to have seen through it from the first. In the ordinary way, I believe I would have done. But coming like that, bang on top of our little celebration, just when we were all feeling so pleased with ourselves, naturally it took me by surprise. That's another key point, the fact that he references that he arrived just when they were feeling pleased with themselves. Priestley's done that very precisely because maybe he's implying that the upper and upper middle classes are feeling a little bit too pleased with themselves about all the concessions they've made and the changes, and actually need to start developing more and breaking down those barriers even more. Mrs. Berlin, I wish I'd been here when that man first arrived. I would have asked him a few questions before I allowed him to ask us any. It's all right saying that now, Mrs. Berlin. I was the only one of you that didn't give in to him. And now I say we must discuss this business quietly and sensibly and decide if there's anything to be done about it. Mr. Berlin, with a hearty approval. You're absolutely right, my dear. Already we've discovered one important fact, that the fellow was a fraud and we've been hoaxed, and that may not be the end of it by any means. Gerald, I'm sure it isn't. Keenly interested. You are, eh? Good. To Eric, who is restless. Eric, sit down. Sulkily. I'm all right. All right? You're anything but all right. And you needn't stand there as if what? As if you'd nothing to do with us. Just remember your own position, young man. If anybody's up to the neck in this business, you are. So you'd better take some interest in it. I do take some interest in it. I take too much. That's my trouble. It's mine too. Now listen, you two. If you're still feeling on edge, then the least you can do is keep quiet. Leave this to us. I'll admit that fellow's antics rattled us a bit, but we found him out. And all we have to do is to keep our heads. Now it's our turn. Our turn to do what? Sharply. To behave sensibly, Sheila, which is more than you're doing. Bursting out. What's the use of talking about behaving sensibly? You're beginning to pretend now that nothing's really happened at all, and I can't see it like that. The girl's still dead, isn't she? Nobody's brought her to life, have they? Sheila eagerly. That's just what I feel, Eric, and it's what they don't seem to understand. Whoever that chap was, the fact remains that I did what I did, and Mother did what she did, and the rest of you did what you did to her. It's still the same rotten story, whether it's been told to a police inspector or somebody else. According to you, I ought to feel a lot better. To Gerald, I stole some money. Gerald, you might as well know. As Berlin tries to interrupt, I don't care. Let him know. The money's not the important thing. It's what happened to the girl and what we all did to her that matters. And I still feel the same about it. And that's why I don't feel like sitting down and having a nice cosy talk. Sheila, and Eric's absolutely right. And it's the best thing any of us has said tonight. And it makes me feel a bit less ashamed of us. You're just beginning to pretend all over again. Berlin, look, for God's sake, protesting. Arthur, well, my dear, they're so damned exasperating. They just won't try to understand our position or to see the difference between a lot of stuff like this coming out in private and a downright public scandal. Eric shouted. And I say the girl's dead and we all helped to kill her, and that's what matters. also shouting, threatening Eric. And I say either stop shouting or get out, glaring at him but in a quiet tone. Some fathers I know would have kicked you out of the house anyhow by this time, so hold your tongue if you want to stay here. Quietly, bitterly, I don't give a damn whether I stay here or not. You'll stay here long enough to give me an account of that money you stole, yes, and to pay it back too. But that won't bring Eva Smith back to life, will it? And it doesn't alter the fact that we all helped to kill her. We'll stop there. So fold the corner of your page over on page 215. That's all we're going to read for today. I stopped and gave you some annotations. You now have to do the task at the bottom of the page. If you don't have green and red, try and find any other colours, as long as you've got positives where they're taking responsibility for their action in one colour and where they're not taking responsibility for their actions in another colour. I would then like you to draw a table and put the 3 or 4 best quotes for when somebody does take responsibility and the 4 best quotes for when somebody doesn't take responsibility onto your page. Pause this recording now so that you can get on with that task. That will probably take you a good 20 minutes between going back through, highlighting in the different colours, and then doing the table and choosing the 4 best quotes for when they take responsibility and the 4 best quotes for when they don't. I'm going to move the recording on now, but you need to pause and do that task first. So, brief summary. You don't need to write this down. This is just for us to go through and make sure that you've thought about and processed. The inspector leaves the house with each of the Burlings left stunned by the events of the evening. They blame each other for the death of Eva Smith, whilst Eric and Sheila seem to have genuinely have learned, I need to take a have out now, something from the evening. Mr. and Mrs. Burling only seem bothered about the consequences of this scandal coming out in public. At this point, Gerald arrives back. After speaking with a police officer on his walk, he believes that there is no Inspector Gall on the police force. Mr. Burling calls up the police and confirms this. Sheila and Eric continue to argue that whether the inspector was a fraud or not doesn't matter. What matters is that the girl is dead and that they all played a part in it. Mr. and Mrs. Burling disagree with this stance and act as though a weight has been lifted off their shoulders. Gerald suggests that a girl may not have died at all. He proposes, we pause and we haven't read this far, but I'll read the summary because you already know what's happening. He proposes that as none of them saw the same photograph, the inspector could have pieced together negative stories about each of the family members and created a story about one girl from this. Burling rings the infirmary and certifies that in fact no girl has been brought into the infirmary due to suicide. Just as Mr. and Mrs. Burling begin to mock Sheila and Eric for being hysterical, the telephone rings to reveal that a girl has just died on her way to the infirmary after swallowing some disinfectant. The phone call reveals that a police inspector is on his way with questions to the family. The curtain falls. So, as we've discussed all the way through, Inspector Gall. Priestley is ambiguous about whether Inspector Gall is a real police inspector, a hoaxer, or a supernatural phenomenon, such as a ghost. Aside from the wordplay in his name, the inspector has an extensive knowledge base, an ability to seemingly read what is about to happen, which adds to that sense of the supernatural, that mystical, that questionable element about him as a character, and is unheard of by the police. Each of these features makes some readers / audience members believe that he serves as the ghost of the family members' consciences. However, other people believe that the inspector is often interpreted as the voice of Priestley himself. He communicates Priestley's strong moral views. He wants people to start taking care of one another and take responsibility for their actions. Remember, that links into what we know for that AO3, that context. This is most evident in his final speech of the play. We already read that not last week, I think it was the week before, and we annotated that. These views reflect those of Priestley. who was himself a socialist. Okay, so here is the Inspector Gall's worksheet. Okay, you now need to complete the interpretations of the Inspector worksheet. I'm going to pull that up clearer in a moment so that you can see it. This will enable you to consider the Inspector's character in greater detail. You will be shown several quotations by or about the Inspector. Your task is to explain what this shows you about the Inspector.